And hello and welcome to Forum 360, a presentation of Western Reserve Public Media, the Fusion channels 45, 49, and we're heard on Rubber City radio stations WONE and WAKR in Akron. And I am your host, Bill Saus. One of our guests today is an author, and she is married to one of the founders of Belkin Brothers Productions, Belkin Productions. We are so pleased to have one of Northeast Ohio's fantastic couples in the entertainment industry with us today, Mr. and Mrs. Jules Belkin. Fran Belkin, Jules Belkin, good to have you on Forum 360.
Nice to be here, Bill.
And we are going to talk about the author of the book, Rock This Town, Fran Belkin. And Fran, you wrote this book, Backstage in Cleveland, Stories You've Never Heard and Swag You've Never Saw. Fran Belkin, and of course the Belkin Productions, the swag being some identified right there in the front cover, the t-shirt of, that happens to be the World Series of rock, which Northeast Ohio is so involved in rock, Cleveland, Akron, Kent, Youngstown, a lot of great rock and roll. The history goes back almost 5 decades, and we're so glad to have you folks. Fran, we're thankful that you're here. You have your husband here. Tell us a little bit about your husband and how you met, and how Jules and you met.
Well, I was born in Cleveland, but my mother picked us up and moved us to California when I was very young. But we would come back to Cleveland every now and then and visit our relatives. And in my last year of college, I came back to visit, and somebody said, "Do you want to be introduced to a nice young man here?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm a California girl."
Yeah.
But he said, "Well, but he has a beautiful new convertible and a boat, and he's 30 years old." Oh, I said, "That sounds interesting. Give him my number."
Yeah, so that started it out. Then you eventually left UCLA.
Well, we had 2 dates in Cleveland. I fell head over heels in love with Jules. I had to go back and finish school.
Okay.
And then he followed me out to LA a month later.
There he is.
Followed her out a month later. And of course, I was kind of happy also, being a little bit older. I was 31 at that point. My mother was starting to aggravate me about, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? And so guess who showed up?
Yeah.
And beautiful little lady from California. I went out there, proposed after 2 days, and about 2.5 months later, we got married.
And that's why I want to say Rock This Town is a wonderful history of rock and roll and entertainment, concerts and promotion, but it's also a love story. In the back pages, you'll read more about it. Now, Jules, you and your brother, your younger brother Mike, who passed away in 2019. We miss him, but you and your brother started out of your family's clothing store on the west side of Cleveland, right?
Right. Our family had been in the clothing business for quite a few years. Happened that both Mike and I were working at the stores, and we had another store in Ashtabula and one in Paynesville. Mike was working out in Ashtabula. The owner of a complex that he was in would book these 50s and 60s bands, Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, right, Glenn Miller, all of those guys, and have a concert at a little hall in Ashtabula. And if you made a purchase that week at the store, you got a free ticket. Wow. So after a while, this guy got tired of booking, and Mike is there. He said, Mike, why don't you do this? It's easy. You make a call, you get the band, and that's it. Mike said, fine. Well, out of that, after a while, Mike was talking to an agent, and the agent said, you know what? He says, there's this new music starting to happen. Right. And there's nobody in Cleveland, I know you're from Cleveland, there's nobody in Cleveland that's really doing this or thinking about it. Why don't you think about this kind of music? Right. And of course, what kind of music? It was rock and roll.
Right, WAKR had started in WJW with the Moondog.
Exactly.
Moondog Alan Freed's promotions, and basically you and your brother kind of dovetailed into that and moved it through. Really progressed it through.
Yeah, well, at that time it really started blowing up. I mean, it started getting real big.
Right. Now, there were a lot of concerts that you started, like you said, the early days of rock and roll and folk rock, like the Everly Brothers and our New Christy Minstrels, and then worked your way into the harder top 40 rock. What were some of the early productions you started with in the, let's say, early 70s, when you were late 60s, early 70s, that you recall?
On the first one, first concert we did was New Christy Minstrel for Freshmen. And that was kind of, well, a little folky. It wasn't hard rock.
Right.
And really, the first year or so, wasn't too much hard rock. It was Johnny Mathis.
Right.
It was kind of stuff that we were more familiar with.
Middle of the road.
In our genre of music. And it wasn't, I think, until probably the late 69, early 70 that we started doing rock.
Now, one of the questions I know many people are asking about is, as a lifelong Clevelander, were you amazed by the way that the Cleveland became the center of rock and roll in the United States? I mean, did that just amaze you? You were right in the middle of it.
Well,
was that amazing?
It was, I think, it was amazing because, we, again, not being the big city, not the Philly, not the New York,
LA,
where there were some great radio stations also.
Right.
It was kind of surprising that Cleveland rose to the top, but there were reasons. I mean, we had very, very strong stations with very strong personalities.
Right.
And I think the personalities kind of ingratiated themselves to agents, to PR guys.
Promotion.
And they come in, promotion guys, and they would come into town and they were happy with what they saw in Cleveland.
Now, Fran, when you wrote the book, you were preparing the book. Tell me some of the things you wanted to make sure that the people that read the book, our audience, if they want to go buy the book, obviously at the bookstore, Rock This Town. Fran, tell me some of the things that you wanted to make sure this book had in it.
Well, I think alluding to what you and Jules were talking about, this was a very special time in Cleveland.
Right.
And our radio station was, well, they played to such a sophisticated audience in Cleveland.
True.
Cleveland broke so many acts. And of course, Jules was right behind them, booking them. And I wanted to show that time because now Cleveland is not at the epicenter, but at that time, every band wanted to play Cleveland. They wouldn't think of passing up Cleveland.
And the music hall downtown, or in those days, maybe the Cleveland Arena, you had some of the smaller venues. But Jules, you came down to the Akron area to work with the University of Akron's Rubber Bowl. Tell us how that happened.
We really didn't have real big halls in Cleveland. The largest we had was 10,000 seats.
Right.
And as rock started building, in order for us to grow, we had to do some larger concerts also. And the stadium certainly in Cleveland was not on the radar at that time.
Right.
But the Akron Rubber Bowl was good, and I'm trying to remember, there were a couple administrators down here that we got to know at the University of Akron and created a great relationship. And he said, you got to come down, you got to do something in Akron.
Right.
And
amazing.
It turned out to be probably one of the most amazing group of concerts outdoors in a larger facility than any other place in the country.
I know I attended one years ago, 1972 in July, and it was the Rolling Stones and Stevie Wonder. Now that had a little bit of controversy for Akron police and so forth because, and it's written about in the book if you're interested in what happened there.
The Akron police were always a little wary of rock.
Right.
And I think I mentioned that it seemed like every concert they were throwing tear gas at the audience before they even got into the hall. into the arena.
Well, some
into
people
the
even
stadium.
said, when the Moondog concerts in Cleveland, they had trouble even on Euclid Avenue
Right.
with the Cleveland Arena. So I mean, the police had heard what Cleveland police had to deal with, but the tremendous response was obvious. The people kept coming, and then that led to the World Series of Rock concept in Cleveland, the stadium, and that's where. Tell us about how you wanted to get more involved, but your pediatrician, you already had your kids, and your pediatrician said, Fran, if you're going to get involved in the big rock concerts downtown at the stadium, you're going to be with Jules more. And Mike, tell us what happened.
Well, I was at my pediatrician's office complaining to him that Jules was gone all the time, and I'm home stuck with these 2 kids. And he says, now you listen to me, Fran. I've been to those concerts. I see what's going on. He said, it's very dangerous for a married man. He said, I think that you should get a sitter, not a divorce, and be down there with Jules.
So your babysitter
and
came
so
down.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
We employed half the neighborhood.
That's funny. Now, there was an interesting, my wife always loved a singer named Bette Midler. Tell us what happened when you were trying to promote Bette Midler. They call her the, Divine Miss M.
Divine Miss M, who was known on the East Coast because of her gigs at the Continental Baths, gay baths out there, but really didn't have that great a following yet in the Midwest. But we had heard that she's exciting lady, thinking about going out on the road, and Wixie started playing some of her music. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take a shot. I'm going to do 3 cities in the Midwest on a weekend. And let's see what happens. Well, in order to really promote her properly, you had to do something different. And at that time, I had a convertible, not the same one that I had when I got married, but a different convertible.
That was my convertible.
We put a couple young ladies, at the concert was, I think, in the beginning of February, put a couple young ladies with bikinis in the back of the convertible with a big pine tree because
Palm
that was
tree.
palm tree.
Palm.
Because that right,
Make it look
because
more
that was
tropical.
kind of Bette Midler's signature.
Yeah.
And we drove down Euclid Avenue, and sure, the next day in the Cleveland Press, we got front page, a picture of the girls
Yeah.
and the convertible. And of course, the concert sold
And
out.
she made a tremendous
and it was
amount.
all history after that.
Yeah, I remember the Boogie Woogie Boogle Boy was one of her big songs. And
Well, the concert was amazing, and I had called all my friends and said, please buy tickets to the show, because we didn't know if it was going to sell. And that night, she came on stage, and we were so blown away that we hired a van, and we went down to the Columbus show 2 nights later to see it again.
Exactly. You just want a good concert promotes other good concerts. You had some smaller venues, I think, earlier in your career, like Cloverleaf Speedway, and you had some of the smaller.
The ill-fated Cloverleaf
Speedway. And
one concert, and they threw us out.
But then you had so many sold-out concerts, and I love reading about the sold-out concert at the stadium. It was 82,500 people, 82.5 at the Cleveland Stadium. So the World Series of Rock and Roll. Tell us how you came up with that name and that tradition, and where did you go?
You know what? Thinking about what can you call something like that, and again, big stadium, baseball. What does it mean? World Series. And that's all that Mike and I kept coming up with. We
Right.
come up with one name and, no, it doesn't sound good. And then, what about World Series? World Series. Well, sure enough, World Series of Rock
Tied it
was
in.
born there.
We are Forum 360, a presentation of Western Reserve Public Media on the Fusion channels 4549, and you're heard on the River City radio stations WONE 97.5 and 1590 WAKR in Akron. Our guests are Jules and Fran Belkin. I'm Bill Saus, your host, and we are talking about the book that came out called Rock This Town. How can people find this book? Where can they go for copies?
Well, the book is, of course, on Amazon, and it's at all the Barnes & Noble stores in Northeast Ohio.
Very good.
And it's at most of the independent bookstores, Fireside, Loganberry.
Right.
And it's at the Cleveland T-shirt shop down at 4th and Euclid.
Probably there too.
And one last place.
And the Rock Hall.
Rock Hall of Fame.
It's at the Rock and Roll
Downtown.
Hall of Fame. And Al Nola Shoe Repair in Twinsburg.
All right, we're not too far from
He
here.
asked if he couldn't sell my book.
And our host studio is the Hudson Community Television, and the folks here in Hudson are hosting, and that's not too far. Twinsburg is not too far for a lot of our folks here. Now, talk about the swag you talked about. The swag being the promotional material, things like T-shirts, bags. You got a lot of response from the
Stuff
concert.
we all get, swag.
You have a couple things there.
Yeah, actually, that's the one you just showed in the
Show
book,
on
but this
television.
is the real one right here. And actually, this piece is a baseball jersey. Because we were in the clothing business, we had kind of had
Tied that in
access
right
to
away, yeah.
all kinds of different stuff,
Yeah,
bowling shirts,
yeah.
baseball shirts. We started, we thought that a good way to thank these bands who have been coming in maybe 2, 3 different cities for us, to give them something very special, just for them, just for their crew, never went out to the public. So all of the things that we gave these people, they were not found in public places, not the merchandise that people
Sure,
would buy
yeah.
when they went to a concert.
Right.
They were buying the band's merchandise.
Right.
This was stuff that we made up.
It's amazing because it's history, and when you read the book, the Rock This Town book, you learn about the primary sources. You see copies of tickets, you see T-shirts, and they've got the dates, and that has become quite a quite a interesting way of promoting T-shirts. One of our groups that started right here in the Kent area, James Gang, they started in the Kent area, Kent State University guys, and look at some of the T-shirts from there. So just the history of all the material that it's involved. Now, one of the things I noticed when you were talking earlier about trying to find the relationship, you wanted to get close to the groups as promotions person, but you wanted to give them their own space. One thing you folks did is you came down to Cuyahoga Falls, it's written in the book, you talked to an RV sales group, and you got some RVs and some trailers to take up to the Cleveland Stadium, right? And you set up their
That was Fran's gig.
Fran's idea.
Cleveland Stadium and all the hospitality. That was Fran's gig.
So in other words, Fran, when the rock stars or the musicians would need to take a break, they go into their RV right there parked on the
Right.
turf.
Well, it was Jules' idea to get the RVs, and it was brilliant because there were no dressing rooms at the old stadium, and it was dank and dark, and so we did them in a circle. We'd put them all around, and we would put carpeting and plants, and we bring in pinball machines. One show we actually brought in a hot tub. But the nice thing is that as the different bands were coming on and off the stage, and even before the show, they'd kind of hang out in this little village, and it gave them the opportunity to talk to each other, which, they were not booked as a group. They were all booked independently. So there was quite a nice vibe at our shows.
And the staff really helped. Your staff was, some people have changed over the years, but your staff was always there to help, always there to meet with the rock stars. Tell us about setting up a contract. Obviously, you had your lawyers; they had their lawyers, but and their agents. But you'd always have these riders where they'd have to have certain amenities brought into the concert hall or into the stadium.
Well, the riders, as the years went on, became more imaginative, more creative.
Yeah.
And the famous story is Van Halen said, no brown M&Ms, which one of the classic rock stories. But they would ask for so many different things. There was, Kiss, of course, had a great sense of humor, but they also had a sense of good wine. So in every rider over the years, they would ask for a certain group of red wines.
Okay.
And they would tell you specifically what the name was, and we would provide it. Well, one year they came up and they had a specific name that we had to look for. We went all over town, hit every wine store in the city, could not find it. As it turns out, just to aggravate the promoters, they created this name. It was not a real winery. And they had every promoter in the country going nuts.
Where is this place?
Never found it.
Right, that's fine. Now, one of the obviously elite bands from England, besides the Rolling Stones, that you work with, Pink Floyd. Roger Waters, one of the founders of that group. Tell us a little bit about your reflection on your relationship with that group.
Those guys were just, all of them were nice. Not to say that there's a bunch of bad guys in our industry, but some were more friendly to the promoter. Other people came in and they kind of felt that, the promoter was there to do a job. We do our job, you do your job, and we go on to the next city. But Floyd's people were great, and we did a show at the stadium, 1977, sold out the show, great performance. And what we did is we made up these leather bags, beautiful brown leather bags, and in gold lettering it said Pink Floyd, Cleveland Stadium, 1977. And we gave it to just to the band, not to the crew.
Not to the staff of the crew.
This was very special. Plus, Fran and I took one home ourselves. And the guys really loved it. 20 years later, when Roger was in town as a soloist, Roger Waters, we were talking in the hallway, and Roger said, he says, wait one second, I want to go into my dressing room. And he goes into his dressing room, comes out with the bag. He said, I travel every place with this. This is my favorite piece of luggage. He says, the only thing I've had to replace the handle a few times, but it's great. Nice. Well, a couple of years later, Roger came back with another tour, and we're talking. He says, he said the bag just finally fell apart. Wow. I don't have my bag anymore.
And this is it.
Kind of sorry. Well, it brought to mind that we have a brand new one at home, never used. So during the intermission, I ran home, got our bag, gave it to Roger again. You couldn't see a more happy person. What a happy person.
Wait, Roger was happy, but I did not have this bag to photograph for my book.
That's right. That is a missing original.
I was not
the
happy.
Book. There is a facsimile.
Exactly, an artist facsimile.
An artist facsimile. Now, the night that you joined Kiss, Fran, what happened when your husband, the night he joined Kiss?
Oh, you mean when he had to?
He had to.
Well, I guess in the rider, every promoter had to dress up and be made up as somebody from the band. And everybody, all the different promoters around the country, they were all either Gene Simmons or Paul Stanley. Jules was the only one in the country that came as Peter Criss.
There you go.
Yep. And there I was.
So in the book, the photographs are fantastic. And,
I just want to add, talking about riders.
Yes.
I had to laugh because Rod Stewart always put in his rider in capital letters, "No American beer." Oh. The English did not want that in their dressing room.
See, that's specific. Now, you had a very interesting story in your book about Phil Collins of Genesis and Phil Collins. Tell us your experience. I mean, you seem very close to that.
Well, I actually brought that shirt.
Let me see that. It's a bowling shirt.
It's a bowling shirt. They were all, in fact, everybody got their name.
And
this
on
is
the
Jules,
back, did it have a...
But on the back, it's...
Hold that up.
It says Phil Collins and his gutter balls.
All right, Cleveland, 1985. There you go.
So Phil was doing 2 shows in Cleveland. And on the in-between night, of course, we like to do something. And so we planned a bowling party, and Jules had these very authentic bowling shirts made up and fixed, and I was so excited, and we gave them all out before the party because you had to have your bowling shirt on to get into the party. I give Phil his bowling shirt, and he looks at it, and he says, "Phil Collins and his gutter balls, what does that mean?" So I said, "Well, you know, Phil, gutter balls when you bowl." He said, "Brits don't bowl."
British people don't bowl. Well, I appreciate it. That is a great story to end our program with. Fran Belkin wrote the book, Rock This Town. Her husband, one of the co-founders with his late brother, Mike. We have Jules Belkin with us today. And Forum 360 is, again, a presentation of Western Reserve Public Media. And we are thankful to be on Fusion Channels 45, 49. We are on Rubber City Radio. And our host group is the Hudson Community Television folks. I want to thank you too. Get involved.
Thank you, Bill.
In more talks about this, and find this book, folks, Rock This Town by Fran Belkin. Thank you for being with us.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.